story time.
Story time, and it's nice not to see you, my friend.
Nice not to see me. You're too kind.
We spent some time together, and that's very nice. And then we take a break, but the show must go on, and because today it's an audio only podcast, I don't need to see you.
You don't need to see me. I can see our guest though, Shankar. How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you, Sean. Thanks, Marco, for having me on the show.
Yeah, of course. So this is Sean says story time. It's what we call the origin story. First time that we talk to a new company, we get to know you, Shankar, for the first time. So we're very curious minds, and we would like to know, first of all, something about you and what motivates you to start this company, offer the service you offer, your vision and your mission. So tell us a good story.
Yeah, thank you guys again for having me on the show. So prior to starting Asimily, I used to run the IoT. So I'm going to walk backwards. I used to run the IoT business at Symantec. I had started the IoT business. I had grown it. And so many of the things we're doing today, I had experience with those verticals like healthcare, industrial, utilities, manufacturing, like within industrial manufacturing, oil and gas, all of those had experience with. And prior to that, I have a product and engineering background. I launched the iPhone 3G modem many years ago. And then before that, I worked on some of the early algorithms, which today people are using in machine learning, but I worked on it a long time ago. So my background was product engineering business before I started Asimily. And the reason I started Asimily was because when I was driving this at Symantec, when Symantec got acquired by, went through a couple of acquisitions, it became clear that there was a need in the market where, there were some existing solutions, but they were very IT-ish, like they were used in the world of IT. They were expanding to IoT, IOMT, industrial. That was problem one. The problem two is, even today, a lot of existing solutions, just think about it in terms of visibility. Whereas telling people just that problems exist is part of it. Like you have to let them know what is there, what are the issues, and so on. But helping them analyze those risks, prioritize them, and mitigate them is equally important, because customers want to reduce risk, CISOs want to reduce risk. That's what keeps them awake. And so I saw there's an opportunity to help customers solve that fundamental problem, because the issue there is very different from IT. And so I decided to start Asimily. And I've had started companies in the past before, so was not new for me, but it felt at the right time, at the right place. Somebody was fine with me going, and it was not conflicting. So then I decided to start Asimily.
Yeah, very cool. And I see it all too often. The forcing of traditional protections or traditional IT model onto other parts of the business or other areas of the business. And yeah, I think even like industrial control systems or OT devices, they're different teams, they have different business objectives. The biggest one I often hear of is things are driven by safety, not by privacy. It's probably one of the bigger ones. So with that in mind, what are some of the things that your customers and your prospects say, we need help, the traditional IT stuff isn't working? I think you mentioned visibility and things like that, but what are some of the challenges they face as they're trying to get budget to manage and secure these things and communicate to the board and executive leadership team to say, here's the best path forward, but we can't just leverage the existing stuff we have?
Yeah, great question. So first thing I think that organizations find difficult with the board, I'll start at the highest level, is boards generally say, but we have never been attacked, so why invest money in it? It's not happened to us. Oh, it might have happened to that customer down the street, but we are different. It's never going to happen to us. And everybody wants to believe that they are unique, they're different, and they got it covered. So the first challenge with boards is generally to tell them the risk exists, and it's important, because if we had to have a ransomware attack in a health system, or if you have an attack that shut down your power plant, you could be losing millions of dollars a day, not to mention like the reputational costs and damage that you will encounter. So that's challenge number one. And so people have got better, organizations have got better at articulating it. There's more data points out there in the industry. There have been more scenarios where people can gather data from. But beyond that, the question then becomes is, what can we do about these devices? Okay, what are you going to do to help us reduce the risk? Because these devices are different. So it's not just about privacy, like you said, it's availability is number one. If you go into a hospital and your machine is not working and the patient has to wait in line for 1 hour and leaves the hospital, that's not a good scenario. And if you go into a production plant and it's not working, that's not a good scenario. Your production plant can't be down. It needs to be operational. So availability is number one. At the same time, you have risk and vulnerabilities. So how do you really reduce the risk? That becomes a question. And so then you get a pushback saying like, but what are we going to do about it? Even if you find out what's the problem, it's better not to know the problem. Maybe we'll be safe that way by being ignorant. And so then the question that becomes is, how do you show them the value? How do you show them the ROI? Because this is a much more difficult and different problem than your traditional IT. And so that becomes problem too. If the board buys in, yes, that's important, but then how do I show a value add, or how do I show risk reduction when these devices are different? So those are the two things that organizations are generally grappling with, and that's what we help them. We help them with one, we have enough data, but we also help them with two, because like I said, we not only give them visibility into what devices exist, services, applications, connections, but we also tell them where their vulnerabilities are and how to mitigate them. Because just because there is a vulnerability on a device does not make it at risk, which is very counterintuitive to IT. It does depend on what the device is, its use case, its configuration, how it's set up. So knowing where the risks lie, where the vulnerabilities, among them, which ones are risky, what can you do to mitigate? Because patches aren't always available. All of them play a big part in finally presenting a picture to the management saying, there is value here, we can actually take action, and we can reduce risk in an efficient manner without like burning a hole through a pocket.
Yeah, it's that saying in cybersecurity, you can't secure what you can't see, what you don't know you have, right? So
yes.
Pretending is not going to happen to you, pretending that you don't have that problem is not a good start. And I feel like we're still a young industry compared with others, but I think we have enough experience. So do you find yourself when you start working with a new customer and you do the first inventory and visibility that they're surprised by what they don't see? Are we still there?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say 90% of the customers are surprised by what they see.
Okay.
And many times you also get pushback saying, oh, this can't be my environment. Like, this can't be true.
You made a mistake. This is
you can't be true. This can't be true. And we say, no, this is true. This is what the data is saying. Now, could it be something be off? Yes, but for largely, this is true, what we are seeing. And you're feeding us the data. We're getting it from your network. So there's no ambiguity here. So we still see that a lot. It could be devices they never thought existed, operating systems they never knew are running. So they're so old. Or it could just be the number of devices. They say, oh, yeah, we have 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, and now we're finding 40,000. And they're like, where did these devices even exist? And now we're showing them where part of the network it exists. Yeah, so I think, that still happens a lot. And I think that's part of the value proposition. Shadow IT is a real thing. And it's not just what they find first time. It's what they encounter happens on a regular basis. They might say, oh, nobody ever plugs in any device into my network. It's all clean. Nobody ever plugs a device. And then guess what? In 1 month, you suddenly have another 1,000 devices that came in and went out of your network, and you have a shock in a larger organization. So this is prevalent.
Sure. That's not happening to me. But when they see that, beside the initial shock, do their approach to working with you and to be, having a more proactive approach, does it change the moment that they actually do realize that there is a visibility problem?
Yes, absolutely. But it also opens their eyes to much more. Because yes, they get a sense that there is a visibility problem. But if you are like a security practitioner, if you're an IT professional, the next thing you will ask is, what do I do now? Because, okay, now I knew there were 40,000 instead of 20. So what is a question? Because they tell their board, I found 20,000 more devices. The board says, so what? Congratulations. What are you going to do about it now? So it does then shift the conversation. First, they get more open, but it also shifts the conversation saying, okay, what am I going to do about it? Where is my risk really lies? Where is my attack vector lies? How do I mitigate it? So it does move into the next stage of discussion, and it propels the discussion forward for sure.
And I can't help but think it's easy to look at risk. And I want to touch on kind of the prioritization. On your website, you have identify and prioritize the risk is 2% of the devices. which is one area, but and I want to hear your thoughts on that. But there's also another where I think if an organization doesn't know they have that many things, and one, they've spent money on these things, are they actually being used? If they're being used, are there people managing them? If they're not managing them, should there be? I just see a lot of operational overhead, perhaps, and maybe even investments that the company can save money while also reducing the exposure. So how much of the equation is pure vulnerability and looking at that risk, but also the bigger picture of the business? We need a better business model around all these things.
It's a great question. So I would say we do both, and I think both are important. So I want to first start by saying just because they didn't know the devices exist doesn't mean it's not being utilized, because an organization might have many business units, and every business unit might be utilizing a device, but at the corporate level, they just didn't know about it. And because organizations sometimes are messy, they're not centrally controlled in procurement always, or people procure and they forget about it, but somebody is using it. So it's not as straightforward as if they didn't know it was not used. But what we do have, just to start with the utilization point, is we do track the utilization of every device in the environment. We track how well it was utilized. Was it even turned on in a given day? Maybe you have a device and you never turned on, and you have like 100 of these devices. You never turned on 50 of them, and you go to your procurement team and say, "Oh God, we are so strapped. We need 50 more." But guess what? You're not even using 50. So we track utilization. We track whether it's turned on or off. For imaging devices in healthcare specifically, we even track what kind of scans you're doing, what time it was done, all of the vital information that will help with industrial, IoT, healthcare. And so that does provide operational metrics. And sometimes, even though you might be shocked, like surprised as a corporate officer that how many devices I have, it could be fairly still well utilized because your business teams are still utilizing them. You just weren't aware about it, right? And so there is that dichotomy sometimes that you have to realize in these organizations, because they're large sometimes large organizations aren't always the most efficient. So that we capture, and so that helps them get better procurement and planning, and that improves your overall operational efficiency, which does feed into the risk. Because if you are really strapped on like a few devices, and if one of the device goes down, that's a much higher operational risk to you than if you have 1,000 of those devices and one went down. So there are those things that actually then feed into the operational risk and feed into the prioritization, which is just one more metric into prioritization. But yes, that operational aspect is being considered into this. So it is the holistic picture. It's not just vulnerability. Vulnerability is just one aspect of what we consider as risky. There is operational risk, there's patient impact risk. Like in healthcare, there is like safety and regulatory risk in industrial. There's something else, cost and downtime in industrial. So depending on the vertical, we have different kinds of risks. And so vulnerability feeds as one component of it, and many other pieces feed in to figure out the overall risk posture.
Yeah, and I see you work with many different industries, from energy and utility to financial services, healthcare. I'm not going to list them all, but obviously there is not a solution that applies to everybody. It's not a cookie cutter approach. So how a company in any of this industry can start working with you? What is the typical first step when they get in touch with you?
So typically, they usually see a demonstration of a product. Now, we have slides, but we have gone past the day of slides where people just look at slides and they buy. They have to see the demo of the product to see how the product. And we have enough customers in many verticals. So normally, they can see a demo and we can show them what real data looks like. We are not making up data. This is real data from a anonymized customer with their permission. So they'll see the product and they'll ask questions like, how does this work? How does that work? How are you doing risk prioritization? How are you using business impact? How are you using cost and regulatory conditions into your environment? So that's generally step one. And then they have follow-on questions. We have a fairly large set of capabilities. So they might ask follow-on demos. And then depending on the size of the organization, if you're a large organization, you would want to test it sometimes, and you'd say, I'm a large organization, I want to test it in my environment. Generally, if you're a small to mid-size, you might be fine with a couple of reference calls because, you don't have the bandwidth and, we are proven. So you kind of get a reference calls and then you can decide on pricing and then acquire and buy the product. If you're a fairly large organization, you might think you're unique, maybe you aren't. And then you want to test it in your environment for a month. See that it actually does what we say. We didn't make it up. You want to confirm. and then you effectively go for production after we work out the financials and legal aspects of it. So that's generally the step process. Step one is a discussion and demo, and maybe it's a follow-on. Step two is either a pilot or like a reference, and step three is like what you do as a follow-on call.
So speaking of environment, can you describe how your solution looks and fits into the operational aspects of the business, the technology stack, team impact, who's looking at the analysis and running it through to patching and remediation and those types of things? What I want to understand is what's the, how does it fit into an organization, and how disruptive or non-disruptive is it, and who's ultimately managing what you're delivering?
Great question. So first of all, a solution has come very non-disruptive because it's overlay on top of the existing network, because we are talking about critical networks like industrial plants, utilities, financial systems, health systems. You can't stop them. You can't expect them to stop operations to work with us. Nobody will. So basically, this is an overlay on top of the existing system. It gathers data from the existing network, analyzes it, and provides these insights. And then we also have ability to query devices in a safe manner and get additional information, which can then aggregate and provide them an overview. And we integrate with like 80 different products, 100 different products, like critical products. And then we have other integrations that will allow them to take actions. Like if we find something, they can use our information to block, segment, and so on. And we can also patch devices. So it's an overlay that sits on top of a network, and using integrations and other ways, APIs to devices themselves, we can actually take actions to the network. So that way it's non-disruptive. We can install
majority of the system is on premises. Is that correct?
So it depends. I think when we talk about US, majority is actually cloud. Okay. When we talk about Europe and Middle East, it's mostly a lot of on-prem. But I would say there are some customers in US who would want on-prem. So we are flexible. We can work on-prem or cloud, and we can work on their cloud provider of choice. In terms of who's the user, it does depend. Again, I'm sorry, there's so many it does depend answers from me.
That's what makes this powerful, right? Because not every business looks the same.
Every business is a little different. So it does depend. Sometimes it's the chief information security officer in some cases. Sometimes it's like the head of IT. It could be the CIO title. And sometimes it's the operational user. It could be like the head of it could be we are working with a customer. They're the manufacturing head. Like they actually are the operations head, they call themselves. They run the manufacturing plant. They oversee everything on the production floor. So they are actually taking in charge of this. And sometimes the clinical head in healthcare and the operations head in, like I said. So it does depend. CIO, CISO, clinical operations. Sometimes it's even networking, though it's a little rare. But could be anybody who has onus, and it does change from department. So one part of our role is to find out who's actually going to be benefited, who actually needs to run it. But irrespective of who runs it, the users go across all these departments. So in every organization we have people in networking use it, people who in operations use it, people in information security use it, and people in IT use it. And so pretty much we deal with all organizations in all departments in an organization, though one of the departments might be the core like in charge of this particular project.
Yeah, and two common interactions is IT and OT, which I think generally we've struggled with from security, kind of letting those two groups, letting those two environments, letting those two sets of data, if you will, come together in a meaningful way. How do you enable those teams and all that stuff to actually coexist in a way that security knows what you mean, IT knows what you mean, ops knows, business knows, and then perhaps even ELT and the board?
It's a great question. When we started the company, we had the initial tagline for the company was bridging the gap between OT and IT. That was the initial tag, because the data we have does that exactly what you said. So I'll give you a simple example. You have a device, it's running a legacy operating system, like information security and IT says you got to replace the device. Whereas operations says, how can I replace the device? Like, it's not as trivial. First, it's very expensive. And then who's going to take care of the downtime? Who's responsible for the entire downtime? So then now we are actually doing the analysis, and a solution is providing data in a meaningful manner that information security can understand the metrics, because they're used to certain terminologies and metrics. But then the data we are pulling demonstrates what operations is saying all along, that just because it might be running a legacy operating system, And just because it might have vulnerabilities may not mean it's at risk. And all the metrics and data we are pulling could indicate that very clearly, broken down by, hey, here's the impact, here is the vulnerability, here's the risk. And so now you have data which operations understands because it's written in a format that they get it. You have data that cybersecurity and IT understand because it's written in a format they get it. And when you combine all of them, they can see how the analysis leads to the data-driven analysis that leads to the answer that everybody can agree that, yes, now I agree, I don't have to replace it. And maybe the answer is different. In some cases, yes, I still have to replace it, or maybe I have to do some other control. But the data has, because it pulls from other aspects and it analyzes in a way, I think our ability to bridge that gap in a meaningful manner, but not necessarily falling on one side or the other, saying replace, not replace. It's not as black and white as that. It's per device, per device in every environment. So that gives confidence and it provides data in a way that everybody can understand and bridges the gap.
Very cool. So we talked a lot about the assessment, the device visibility. Now you're working with a client and you're talking about detection and mitigation. So tell us about how it works in that very important aspect of working with the clients. Of course, avoiding, as you mentioned before, the discontinuity of the service and the product that they provide.
Great point. Great question. So I would say it's actually mitigation and detection and mitigation. And I say it that way because you have to proactively mitigate without waiting for something to happen. And what I mean by that is one of the things our solution does is we have this attack vector analysis where we are able to predict the path of an attacker into the network. And it's very contextual to the device in the network. So knowing where the attacker is going to come from, we provide mitigations that you can apply that will prevent that attack from ever happening. So that's a proactive way of mitigating. It's very different from detecting something and mitigating because we have done the analysis and we have said, these are the 20 ways your organization could get attacked. These are the attack vector paths. Here are the mitigations that you need to apply. Right. So that is what makes one of the things that makes us unique. So that's a mitigation which happens before any real attack detection or anything. And then you have a second level of detection, which happens after you detect. We are continuously monitoring the environment. We see a new 0-day vulnerability. We do something. We see maybe a lateral movement or something. And then we can actually put another level of mitigations once we see it. And mitigations can be many different forms. We can actually go patch some of these devices like IoT devices today, which is pretty good. And we are expanding this to IoMT and OT. As we move forward, we have a roadmap and some ideas where we are working through, which actually is working out. And then we have very many ways in which we can segment the network, whether it is through like specific attack vector mitigation, which is what we are predicting and blocking it. And we have found that to be very successful. Or it is like specifically macro segmentation where you're grouping devices and putting them in their own security enclave so that they stay safe within that little zone they stay in. Or it could be like a macro segmentation where you group devices and you block them only to their services, or just very granular micro segmentation. So there are 5 ways to do it in our solution. And we can do it proactively, which is one of our core IPs, or you can do it reactively after you find a thing, and you can use any of these techniques to do it, which is what makes it valuable.
Yeah, and I think, being able to close that loop, no question, is critical. Some might even say that demonstrating that you've closed that loop is equally critical. Not just internally, certainly the line of business owners want to know that you've mitigated the risk, that the executive leadership team and the board also wants to know that and have proof that you've done that. But you know who else wants proof? The auditors.
Yeah, exactly.
For compliance. And I want to touch on 2 things there. One, clearly what you provide that makes auditing easier, more successful, and then in a way that you actually achieve compliance. But then also, I think you touch on it on your website in compliance, the idea of configuration control. So it's not just a vulnerability that it can be popped, but it's how it's been configured. Does it have a default password, for example? Yeah. And then also you mentioned in a different area the behavior of the devices. So it's context in the business and isn't doing something. So kind of paint that picture of what you're looking at, what you're controlling beyond just patching, and how that supports the big picture of compliance as well.
Yeah. Great question. So first, let's start with the compliance piece on auditors, right? So auditors want risk mitigation. They don't care how it's achieved necessarily. They just want it to be achieved. And so, like I said, patching is one aspect, targeted segmentation where you're blocking the attack vector is one, macro is one, like some form of macro, micro is others, and final macro. So we have all these. And for any one of them, you actually see audits in our solution where it will actually show you like you went from this particular firmware version to this particular firmware version because you applied a patch, or you did these kind of policies in your network, and it'll document it. So you have all this kind of audit information that you can pull from our system. And there's a full audit log which actually shows these actions that have been applied. So now it's very easy to show an auditor, look, you want to see what we have been doing? Here is what we have been doing. Here is the audit log. You can see it and you can filter on it. And this is all the information that's available. You can also go and show it to them on the portal, because every time you fix, it actually marks things as fixed. If you want to directly show it from the portal, that's very easy. You can actually see. So there is enough data in the portal, either in the form of reporting. You can also generate reports, reporting directly on the portal, audit logs, where you can actually make enough of a case that you're doing. And even if you didn't do it, because of the way our attack vectors and everything are structured, many organizations have found it valuable to show the auditor that here is my action plan. And we already have listed, like a solution automatically gives them an action plan. So they don't have to say, I'm going to segment it in the next 5 years. They can say, here are the 12 things I'm going to do in the next 12 months that is going to reduce my risk. This is my action plan. And they come back in 6 months, maybe you did 2 of them, and you can actually show progress. So that already takes care of the audit and issues around there. But then there are problems in these systems beyond like risk mitigation. And I think a lot of problems in our industry, whether it's industrial, utility, oil and gas, manufacturing, utility, oil and gas, healthcare, is not just because of technology and attackers. It's because of people themselves. People are the weakest chain in the attack. And people do crazy things. Somebody might plug in their USB stick onto a big machine like a SCADA controller to charge their phone. You never expect them to do it, but they might do it, or like to an ultrasound to charge their phone. Or somebody remotely logs into a device. This is not the system, it's the manufacturer. And they try to update a device and mess something up in your network. Or the most common thing we see is, even though we say there's an IT OT, it's not as clean as it appears to be in most places. The IT side still touches the OT side, and sometimes they disrupt the OT operations without knowing. Not the person, but the tools. And so when you do these things, how do you know that you've fixed everything today, but how do you know it's going to stay fixed? What if somebody went and installed a new software? And so configuration control does that. It takes a snapshot of your environment and tells you how things are drifting. So you can actually see that I did everything right today to an auditor. And now you can actually see things are drifting, and you can show over time how new services are being opened, new ports are open, and then you can see like who's causing the change. So now you can go address the root cause, because sometimes if you don't know that things are drifting, you're chasing your tail all the time. So configuration control. And then if you have an attack, you have seen organizations who have had an attack and they have to revert back to what was a good state. And they had no idea how it was operating in a good state, because where is the data? So this gives them the data on how to revert back to the good state. And so configuration control helps with that. So it effectively rounds off the thing, because an auditor says, you had great last year, but why you are so bad this year? We are so bad this year because we had other things that happened in our environment. So you want to round the picture, and configuration control provides that. And it also meets a key compliance requirement of disaster recovery. Unlike your IT system where you can go patch it back to its original state, you can't do that with a PLC. You can't do that with an ultrasound. You can't do that with like a traffic light. So you want to be able to have a good state. So you can tell an auditor, I have a good state of the device. If something were to go wrong, I know how to help revert back. So I can meet this compliance needs, and I can protect my environment as well.
So Sean, you're right when you say I shouldn't unplug something.
The traffic light? Don't unplug the traffic light.
I always think of Airplane, the movie. I mean, that scene when you unplug it. It's just something, the human factor right there.
That's right. I want to ask one more question.
You have one more question? I'm surprised.
It's funny. Before you ask me a question, I was talking to this, I would name this like the city, and I was looking at some information there, and I was like, oh my God, like if I were a hacker, I would just take control and I would just take photos of every person on the street. Like it's so straightforward to launch some of this in some parts of the infrastructure that is present. So it's so easy and so do it. So I think it becomes important to do all of this, because otherwise the repercussions are pretty severe. And I think it's a matter of time. So I tell organizations, don't say that we never get attacked. If you don't do anything, it's only going to become a when. I don't want to scare people, but the way some organizations are structured, it's only going to become a when if you don't do anything. And I think if you do anything, at least you raise the bar. You can never say never, but at least you raise the bar that somebody is now not going to get into your environment.
Yeah, that's the key.
I love it. The question for you is, what does that raise the bar success look like, and how do you measure it? And perhaps you can pull on a customer story where they started in one state, worked with you, and moved to another that achieved some business outcome. They reduced risk some measurable way, or increased operational efficiency in some way. Tell us a story about a customer.
So we actually have quite a few stories where we not only reduce risk, but we actually help them with ROIs, real dollar savings that we have shown. A couple of examples I'll give you. One way we actually do measure is organizational risk compared to industry risk. So we can actually say what is the organization's overall risk posture, show the trend line, and mark it against the overall industry, so you can see how bad or good are you with compared to the rest of the industry. Now, we are a new industry, like you guys said, so it doesn't mean that the industry is you're better than the industry or necessarily that much better, because everybody is getting better as well. So I would say that's one way we can truly measure. There are the other trend lines. How many vulnerabilities did you, high risk vulnerabilities did you reduce? How many high risk anomalies did you reduce? So all of these are trend lines, and we can measure them. And so as people are reducing risk, fixing vulnerabilities, fixing anomalies, fixing other issues in the environment, you'll see the organizational risk going down over time. So that's a good measure. And we have had customers, like it's a score of 0 to 100. We have had customers who start from very high scores, like a 90 or 100. So like we were shocked that when we saw the environment, they were shocked. But over time, they have actually got it down to below the industry average, and they're trending to be in one of the best in class. So they've gone from a very high score to reducing risk. And one of the hallmarks of customers we work with is the risk reduction they are able to achieve because of the amount of capabilities we have in reducing risk. And that's seen over time in organizational risk and other trend lines. On the operational efficiency, and by the way, this also has an ROI because you're able to do this with lower number of people, less man hours. And there are organizations who have measured what were they doing before, how many man hours, how much did they do with Asimily, and notice the difference and how fast they're doing. So they also done like analysis on time savings and cost savings. But there's also operational efficiencies people have achieved. They have been able to buy lesser number of devices, being able to buy devices for cheaper. I'll give you a simple example. In the healthcare world, an organization was buying like 2 linear accelerators. These are like the ones you use to treat cancer for patients. They cost like 3 million each. These were running legacy operating systems. And then the customer said, if I bought it by this date, I can buy it for like 2 million, saving $1 million each. But the IS team would block them out and say, you cannot do this because it's running a legacy. But they ran it through our risk analysis. We clearly showed, going back to the point that it uses both data, showed that not only that it is running a legacy operating system, but the risk is not as high as you're anticipating it to be, and it is manageable to these controls. So it's a language IS could understand, clinical understand, and then they bought the linear accelerator for 2 million, and they saved effectively 2 million each. So effectively saved $1 million each, so $2 million on the operational thing, getting it in time and helping their patients. So that's a clear operational efficiency with ROI as well.
Well, that's really cool. That shows how you see your clients as partners, because it's not just offering that specific service, but be there as an advisor, and
Absolutely.
in this case, save them a lot of money. So pretty much the all-in-one platform for every device security needs. I didn't make that up. I just read it on your website, where I invite people to go. The Asimily difference: risk mitigation, inventory visibility, threat and response, vulnerability prioritization, governance, risk, and compliance. I enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot, which is one of the reasons why I like to do this job, because I'm always not the smartest guy in the room, and I'm very excited when I get to talk to people like you that created really, really successful companies. We'll have all the links to get in touch with you, with the company, connecting on the website, and hopefully start a great partnership with you.
Yep, it's asimily.com, Asimily. And I hope we have some more conversations. I'd like to nerd out when we can.
Yeah, we'd love to.
When we can convert technology to business outcomes. And because I have a dream that security has data to make the business more efficient and it can grow, because we can tell them, you're wasting money here. You're burning your team here. You're spending time managing stuff you don't need to because you're not using whatever. All those things we talked about today. You're fulfilling my vision of security, helping the business be more effective and grow. So thanks, Shankar, for taking the time to share your story with us, and hopefully we can have some more. Everybody listening, stay tuned and connect with Shankar and the Asimily team.
Thank you, guys. I enjoyed the discussion. Thank you for having me.